All right, hello everybody. Welcome to yet another live stream from Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and so today we're going to do another live photo editing session. Hopefully you guys can hear me and see my screen. If not, definitely let me know. And sorry, I'm getting a little bit of echo there. Let me just close that out. Hey guys, I see you guys saying hi in the chat, so thank you for joining me once again for this live stream. Hopefully, all right, cool, sound is okay, glad to hear it. Thank you for letting me know, Ano, and hopefully I'm saying your name right. Sweet, looks like screen is looking good too. So, all right, for today's tutorial, I figured since it is around Christmas time and we're getting into winter and you guys are probably cold wherever you are. I'm not really sure, some of you guys are located around the world, but I figured we could use a nice warm image around this time. It's not a Christmassy image. We are getting close to Christmas right now, depending on when you are watching this. If you're watching it live with us, we're just a few days away from Christmas. But anyway, I figured I would go with a warmer photo for today's tutorial. This is a photo of a sunset in Florida, and I thought it was a pretty cool photo. It's a little on the dark side. Not gonna lie, and I tried not to tweak it too much. I didn't want to add too many artifacts or anything. And looks like I'm getting a hello from Israel, so thanks for watching all the way from Israel. So here is and yes, I should mention that it is just the general holiday season, depending on what you celebrate. So I don't want to be suggestive here, but yeah, so happy holidays to all of you guys watching. But anyway, this is the original photo, so it was actually a lot darker, and there were power lines going through the top of this image as well. So I'm going to show you guys how to get rid of those power lines as well and bring out some of the colors from this sunset. But of course, before I get into that, I just want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, you can check out text and video tutorials on here. So definitely check this out. If you haven't already, we also have our poll of the week results. You can also enroll in our best-selling GIMP 2.10 photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And of course, you can support us on Patreon and help our channel grow. And you'll get some awesome GIMP extras in return. And I'm getting a hello from Ghana, so hello, thank you for watching. That's pretty awesome. You guys watching all over the world. It always surprises me, but is also a great thing to see. So many people watching from all over the world. All right, so let's dive in here. I do have a download to this photo if you guys want to follow along directly for today's live tutorial. Let me just adjust the description here. It is under the description of the video. You don't have to go to any separate page. You should just be able to type the link into your browser or copy and paste the link into your browser, and it should just download directly from my website. And if you don't feel comfortable downloading from my website, just use a virus scanner. It's just a JPEG image. But yeah, feel free to download the image and follow along using the link in the description. But here is my original image. This one is 1920 by 1280. I did scale this ahead of time. It was like 5,000 by like 3,000 or something, and I just wanted to make it a little bit more manageable. And for this image, because it's so dark, and dark images, especially when you're using a JPEG editor like GIMP and not a RAW editor, RAWs are going to have a little bit more detail or a little bit more data, and therefore when you're editing a RAW image, you can typically recover more darks versus when you're using a JPEG. Typically, when you turn up the light on dark images, you're going to get some noise going on. So that's why I didn't really turn it up too much. And I also want to mention that my last live tutorial, I did a tutorial on exposure blending, and I used exposure bracketing for that photo. And I would say, for this photo, it probably would have been best to use exposure bracketing just because you do have different exposures for the sky and the foreground here. But this image, it is what it is. I didn't do exposure bracketing. Actually, I didn't even take this photo. This is a photo that my father took. So he didn't use exposure bracketing for this. So that is why we just have what we have here. But, just for future reference, if you guys find yourself taking photos like this where the exposures are, definitely off, like you've got bright exposure in one area and dark in the other, I do recommend exposure bracketing. and then go back and check out my tutorial, our live photo editing session on how to do exposure blending to see how to get that done. All right, I feel like I'm kind of ranting here, so I'm just going to dive into this, and I'm seeing a hello from, or a greetings from Spain, and thank you. I'm glad you like the channel, and thank you to everybody that's giving praises to the channel. Always great to hear, especially from you guys, you viewers all around the world. So, okay, I'm going to do something a little bit unconventional here because of just how dark this image is. I'm not going to start with my color balance today. I'm going to start actually with my exposure, and I'm just going to test it out by turning the exposure up. And so you can see, obviously, if I turn this too far up, yeah, we recover some of the stuff in the shadows here, but the highlights are way blown out. I suppose I could use, why am I blanking on the name? I could use the luminosity mask, there you go, blanking on that name, to edit the shadows from the highlights separately, which that actually is a pretty good method for editing, you know, different exposures like this. But in this case, I'm just going to try to edit this without the luminosity mask. And so I'm just going to turn the exposure down to 0.5, which is something I've been doing a lot lately, just half exposure. And here is a preview with the exposure turned up a little bit. Here's the preview with it without the exposure turned up. So as you can see, it is blowing out the highlights in our sky right here, and so that's not something we want to do too much. If I go up to 1, you'll see that all of this is totally blown out, and that's definitely not something we want. So I'm just going to turn the exposure up by a half a stop, which in this case is almost too much because of the sky right here. And let me silence my phone. So I'm just going to go with that half a stop and then click OK. And so that is going to turn our exposure up a little bit here. Actually, let me Control Z to undo that. Let me just duplicate this so we have a benchmark as we go through and add effects. Then if I click on this copy right here and hit Control F, that is just going to repeat that exposure filter that I put on this. And now we can see this is what it looked like before, and that's what it looked like after. So let me just rename this to original and hit enter. And by the way, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. All right, moving on, I'll go back over here to the copy. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to continue working on recovering some of the details that are in the darker parts of this image. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to colors and then shadows highlights. And this is a tool that was found in GIMP 2.10, and it is a gaggle filter, which means if I check my preview option, it's going to allow me to live preview this as I edit it. And so what I'll do is I'm going to just turn my shadows up, and you guys will see that as I do this, there are details that are recovered over here in the shadows. So if I turn it all the way up, you'll see that that's just way too much. There's some noise, you know, a decent amount of noise, and then it just looks pretty artificial over there in the shadows, even though it does recover a lot of that data. So what I'm going to do is try to find the best happy medium here, where I'm getting a lot of those details back without overdoing it and making it look too artificial. And that's something I say a lot on the channel. But there you can see it before and there's an after. So huge difference there just in tweaking those shadows highlights. And that might be a little bit too much. Let me go back down to about 70 here. You can adjust the highlights as well if you need to. I think in this case, yeah, if we turn the highlights up, it's just blowing out that sky, and that's not something I want. So let me just highlight this and reset it to 0 and hit enter. And then you can also adjust the white point, which is basically going to shift the white pixels in your image. So if you turn it up, there's just going to be more white in the image. If you turn it down, there's just going to be less. In this case, we could probably turn it up just a little bit so we could shift the white point a little bit. And I see that you've purchased our Udemy course, so I appreciate you doing that. If you think that this will be beneficial, then yeah, I'll go ahead and put it on the Udemy course for you to watch as well. Assuming I can download it from YouTube. I think I can download it, but I might not be able to, so if not, just keep that in mind. But I'll try to get this up on the Udemy course. So, okay, here is a preview before and here's after, so that's a pretty drastic difference there. So I'll just click OK. And again, we can just preview, you know, what our image looked like before we started making the edits, and there is after. All right, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to just adjust. I'm going to skip over to the levels, and so I'll go to colors level. So I'm just continuing to actually let me go to the brightness contrast here. So I'll go to the levels next, but I'm just continuing to try to recover some of the data here in the darker parts of the image. So I'm just going to turn up my brightness, and I'm going to turn the contrast up a little bit. I'm going to play around with the colors once I get the brightness and everything to where I want it. And I'm going to turn the brightness down a little bit here because I am starting to blow the sky out even more. And I'm getting a hello from Brazil, so hello, thank you for watching all the way from Brazil. So there, I've just turned up the brightness, and I've increased the contrast as well to try to offset, that brightness increase. You don't want to make the image too flat by turning the brightness up. So I'll just click OK there. So again, before and after. We are blowing the sky out a little bit, which I'm not a huge fan of. So let me hit Control Z on the brightness. And let me just redo that. I'm just going to turn it up a little bit less because I don't really like blowing out those highlights. I think you lose too much detail going on there. So I'll just go with that right there, just a slight tweak. And next I'll just go over to my levels, so colors levels, and this will allow me to play around with the levels of my image, which is going to sort of perform multiple things for me. It's going to allow me to brighten up some of my midtones and my shadows, while also just sort of adding to the contrast. That's not as much with this tool, but that is part of what this tool accomplishes in the end. So I've just made a slight adjustment to my levels here. And this slider over here, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is the shadows. And this one is the midtones. This one is the highlights. So I'll click OK. Again, before, after, so we're a lot brighter. And I agree, GIMP does connect a lot of people from around the world, and I think a lot of open source programs do that. So, all right, now let's go to colors, and I'm going to save the curves for after we add a little bit of the colors in here. So now I'm going to start getting into the colors. I skipped the color balance for this image just because when I do that, you'll see for whatever reason, GIMP is deciding to blow out entirely my highlights right here for this image. I'm not really sure why it does that. That's not really something that I think is, of any use. I think that might just be, maybe GIMP needs a little bit of an update there. So I'm just going to skip that for this image. And that's not a common problem for me, but for whatever reason with this image, it's doing that. So that's not something that usually happens with images. But it would be interesting to hear why that's happening. Anyway, I'm going to go to colors, and now I'm going to go to hue chroma. And so chroma, remember, is basically going to be the purity of the image, the purity of the colors in the image. So when you turn the chroma all the way up, all the colors in your image are just going to be the pure versions of themselves. So in this case, we've got pure yellow, we've got pure blue, pure red. So all the pure versions of the colors are showing up here on our image when we turn the chroma all the way up. So what I'm going to do is just turn it up a little bit, because it's just going to bring out some of those original colors in the sunset there. So again, if I turn it up too much, it looks way artificial. So I'm just going to tweak it by turning it up a little bit, really just on that threshold of artificial and colorful. And you can preview it. So before, it's looking, pretty bland there versus after here. So let me just turn this down a little bit. I think it is up a bit too much. But this is just really bringing out the colors in that sunset. And Yevon, thank you so much for the super chat and for supporting the channel. And thanks for watching all the way from Ukraine. Your support is definitely greatly appreciated there, so I appreciate you doing that. So you guys, anybody can use that super chat feature to support our channel. It's a great way to provide one-time support of our channel. So thank you so much, Yevon, for doing that. So let's adjust the lightness on this as well. So there's a before, there's an after. So as you can see, there's a pretty drastic difference there. We're recovering a lot of the colors in this image, and we're getting that sunset look that is looking as if you were actually there versus before it was just a really dark photo. You could shift the hue as well. That's just going to change the color, so I'll just demonstrate that real quick. So if I shift the hue over to the left, you'll see the colors just start to change. Same if I shift it over to the right. And I'm just going to change this to 0. I think somebody's typing Hebrew on the chat. I don't read or speak Hebrew, but yeah, hopefully that is something positive. But all right, so there's before and after. I'm just going to apply that. And so here's a before, here's an after. So it's already looking really good. I think the colors are really coming out in this image, and it's really starting to come together here. So now I'm going to go to colors, and this time I'm going to skip over the saturation. I'm just going to go to color temperature right now. I just want to see what this would look like as a warmer image. So I always keep the original temperature just set to where it's at. You could always turn it down if it was a cooler image to start, or turn it up if it's a warmer image to start. But what I like to do is just turn the intended temperature either up or down. So if I turn it up, it's going to add more yellows and oranges in here, even maybe a little bit of reds. So it's just going to make it an overall warmer looking image. If I turn it down, it'll just make it a cooler image. So I think in this case, we do not want this to look like a cooler image. I do think that it makes a little bit more sense, because this is a sunset, to have this just be a warmer looking image. Sunsets usually have warmer colors. So I'll just turn that intended temperature up a bit. And as per usual, I don't want to overdo it, so I'm just going to sort of play around with my slider, move it back and forth until I find basically that sweet spot where all my colors sort of look natural and look the best. So there's a before, there's an after. I think that looks pretty good there. Hi Paige, thanks for joining us. I'll click OK to apply that color temperature. And by the way, for you guys who are joining in sort of in the middle of the live session, you can always go back and watch from the start. Although if you do want to participate live in the chat, it's probably best to just watch from the live stream where we're at right now on the live stream, and then you can always go back later and watch that. All right, so there's before, there's an after. So I think this is a really great looking image so far. And I'm just checking to make sure I'm not leaving anything out before we get into some of the photo manipulation parts of this. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is just adjust the curves here. So this is sort of like my final adjustment before I get into using the heal tool. So I'm just going to bring up my curves tool, click in the center here to create a point on my curve, and then I'm going to click down here, and this is going to allow me to adjust my shadows. So I'm just dipping the shadows down a little bit, which is going to make them darker. And then if I click up here and drag it up, it's going to make my highlights brighter. And this usually, it creates an S-curve, so it usually increases the contrast in the image, as you can see there. In this case, I'm trying to be very subtle because I think there's already a pretty delicate balance between the highlights and the shadows. And so I don't want to take away anything from those shadows. So I'll just click OK there. I think that looks pretty good. And let me try one more thing before we get into the heal tool. So let me just see how this is going to look with the saturation turned up a little bit. And just grab a drink real quick. Oh, GIMP has stalled out a little bit here. Should come back here in a second, usually does. Do we have any questions in the meantime while this is catching up? Any shout outs? Hopefully you guys liked the selection area tutorial I put out earlier this week. That was actually a fun one to do. I like delving into GIMP and just really getting down into how GIMP works and how the tools work. So I'm getting a question here. When I start editing my image, do I always have the final result in mind, or do I experiment and go with the best final result, basically? Yeah. Good afternoon, Josh. Usually when I'm editing images, it depends. In some cases, I'm really just trying to make the image look how it looked when I took the photo. In other cases, especially in this case, this photo that we're editing now, I think, I am definitely trying to make it look as if it or how it looked when I first took the photo, or when the photo was first taken. I didn't take this photo again in particular, but yeah, I'm always trying to capture how I thought the image looked at the time it was taken. But in some cases, it's just seeing the colors in the image as you're editing them. It is a lot of tweaking, and just as you can see, I'm pulling sliders to the left and right and just tweaking and going with what looks best, what looks most natural, but what looks most colorful and vibrant, and what produces, a feeling in that final image. So I do a lot of experimentation, but there are times when I'm just really trying to capture what the original looked like. So I'm getting a hello from Georgia, so thank you for watching. Is that Georgia, United States, or is that the country Georgia? Just curious, because we do have a pretty big international audience here. All right, so I'm just going to tweak the saturation now that GIMP has caught up. And I'm just going to see if this looks any better with more saturation versus less saturation. I see you're from Georgia from the US, so thanks for joining. So there's a before, there's an after. I do think that looks a little bit better. Maybe turn it down a little bit. And I'm getting a hello from Catalonia, so thank you for watching. Always cool to see where people are hailing from when they're watching my tutorials. So I'll just click OK. So here is a before. So it's a very dark image and not super colorful image compared to the image that I'm working on now. And I actually added a little bit more color to this image than I did the original one that I edited. So here's the original one I did. So this one has a lot more color. You guys let me know if you like it with more or less color. But all right, now I'm going to get into using the heal tool here. So I'm going to come over here to my toolbox and click on the healing tool. You can always just click H on your keyboard as well, and that is going to be the shortcut key for the heal tool. And what the heal tool does is, and I'm going to hold control and zoom in here because I do want to delete these power lines here. I think it kind of ruins that sort of paradise effect that we have going on here. So basically what you can do, you can use the brackets on your keyboard to increase or decrease the size of your brush. And Josh, I'm seeing that you like it better with more color, so I'm glad to hear that. So what you do is you hold control, and that's going to grab a source. So when I click on here, this is now the source that we're painting from. And what the heal selection tool does, as some of you probably already know from watching my tutorial on this, is that it's going to take the pixels from your heal area, your heal source, and it's going to paint them over the existing pixels here. So basically the area that you're painting over, and it's going to combine it with the pixels around that area that you're painting over to basically erase whatever object it is you're painting on. And so it just sort of allows you to erase things that are in your image very easily just with the stroke of your brush here. So as you can see, it's pulling data from our source area and from the area we're painting on to create a blended final result that makes it seem as if there wasn't ever a power line there. I'm actually going to turn up the size of my brush a little bit, and I'm going to grab a new source. And by turning up the brush, it's just allowing me to grab a bit more pixels from the surrounding area. And I'll hold control, and when I'm using this tool, I'm always constantly grabbing a new source area based on the area I'm painting on, because you don't want the source area to be too different from the area where you're painting. And let me just redo that one because we had some white pixels in there that I didn't want. So as you can see, and I can hold control and zoom out, it's doing a pretty good job of just erasing that power line there. So I'm just going to hold control and paint on here. So as we get into these clouds right here, what you want to do, so I'll decrease my brush size because I don't want the brush going over the clouds here or going outside of the clouds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold control, click within these clouds, and then use that to try to paint over the clouds right here. If I use this color right here, it might still work for this end part, but as we get deeper into the clouds here, because the clouds are so different in color, you don't want to use this area as your source area because it's just going to be too easy to tell that you erase that or that you use that heal tool there. So as you can see now that we're getting into these clouds and using those as a source, and I'm sorry I keep losing my voice, but as we're using those clouds as the source, it's allowing us to match these colors as we use this heal tool to get rid of this power line. And it's creating a pretty seamless final result here. So let me just increase my brush size a little bit now that we're in a little bit larger of cloud area. That was not grammatically correct, but that's okay. So here we go. We're painting these clouds. Hold Control. And there you can see this is doing a pretty good job. You can always zoom out a little bit too. I'm kind of zoomed in a lot right now. That's just allowing me to see more details in here. And I don't know if this is like satisfying to you guys. I feel like this is a pretty satisfying thing, like one of those videos where it's oddly satisfying. That's what this feels like right now. All right, so I'm just using my source area to just make this blend in a little bit here. And you can see I'm just constantly grabbing a new source area as these colors change in the clouds. And I've been using the little bar down here to navigate around my image. You can also use the space bar to move around, and that's probably a little bit easier. And then as we get close to the palm trees here, I'm going to decrease my brush size, hold Control, and I'm just going to try to not accidentally paint out the palm tree there. And for the sake of time, I might just quickly go over this like so. If I had a little bit more time to spend on this, I would. All right, so there we go. Our first power line has been erased. So there's a before with that power line there. There's after, and the power line is gone. So Linus, I'm glad you think it's amazing. And Josh, you mentioned the middle mouse button works better than the space bar. I think you might have mentioned that in one of my other tutorials, and I do appreciate that tip. I didn't know that actually. So yeah, I see the middle mouse button does actually move it around just like the space bar. So that's a good tip there. Appreciate that. And Linus, I see you're asking how to create a GIF with GIMP. Do you mean an animated GIF or just saving your image as a GIF? So I'm going to hold that middle mouse button now, which I actually really like. And that was something, yeah, that you brought up in another tutorial, and I actually forgot that you brought that up, so I'm glad you brought it up again, because that's actually super convenient. And I'll hold Control, zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to decrease my paintbrush size here, my brush head size. Yeah, I agree. GIMP is, in a lot of areas, GIMP is better than Photoshop to me. I think it has a little bit of work to go performance-wise, but I think feature-wise, they've been doing a good job lately of listening to their users and adding cool new features. And I think once they get the performance of all these new features down, especially with larger images, I think Photoshop is going to really start to have to, rethink its strategy and come up with a way to compete with GIMP, because I think GIMP is going to start taking users away from Photoshop. And Adobe is a publicly traded company, which means that they are short-term profit oriented. At least most companies that have public stocks are, which means they are constantly having to plan for the short term and be as profitable as possible for their shareholders, whereas GIMP is free and open source, so they just have to basically create a program that their users like, and they don't have to worry about profits, which is cool. But they do rely on donations and stuff, so if you guys ever have a moment or whatever, you can either donate to the GIMP team. Of course, you can donate to Davies Media Design. Super Chat's the best way to do that, or Patreon, because we are, I consider myself part of, helping GIMP out, spreading the word, and making sure people know how to use the program. But the GIMP development team as well needs support, whether that's helping them with development or, monetary support. Because it is open source, those donations do greatly help. All right, so there is our second power line there, and GIMP did a great job of erasing that. So you could see there is a before, there's an after. So I could probably go through here and clean up some of these lines here because you can kind of tell that I erased it. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave that as is right there. And then I'm going to work on our next power line. And I'm going to start by increasing my brush size. And yeah, this is GIMP 2.10.8, so this is the latest version. I'm always using the latest version, whatever's available for Windows. I am in Colorado, so that is where I'm in the United States. You could probably tell by the accent. Although I don't have like a southern accent or anything like that. Oops. All right, so I'm just continuing to get rid of this line here. And the reason I said I don't have a southern accent is I also lived in Florida, so I went to school in Florida. But Floridians aren't really Southerners. That's more like Georgia, as Keith probably knows. I think Keith was the one from Georgia on here. A lot of people from Georgia have Southern accents, Alabama, those places. But Florida, not so much. But yeah, now we're located in Colorado. All right. And it's ski season over here, so everybody's coming in to ski, so that's always fun. Anyway. All right, so there we have gotten rid of our next major power line there. And now I'm going to hold Control Zoom in, and I'm just going to do these last two here kind of quickly just to not hold you guys up too much on this portion of the photo editing. So there we go. We got rid of that power line. That one was easier because it was a thinner power line, so there's less pixels to replace there. And now for this last one here, I'm going to, whoops, hit Control Z. I think that was too dark there. Let me zoom in a bit. Use the brackets on my keyboard to decrease the size of the heel brush. And there we go. There's also the clone tool, which is similar to the heel tool. The reason I'm not using that is because clouds obviously are not uniform, so it's better to use this heel tool, which is going to sort of invent pixels, versus the clone tool is just going to directly clone the pixels that you grab as your source, and so it's going to just directly copy those pixels, versus the heel tool, which is going to sort of, you know, create new pixels based on your source area and the area you're painting on. So it's sort of trying to fill in the gaps there. Or it's trying to guess what pixel would be there if it weren't for the object that's there that you're trying to erase, if that makes sense. Linus, thanks for joining us from Germany, adding to our international diversity here. We do have a ton of people. We got Israel, we've got Catalonia, we've got Germany, Spain, we got US, obviously. All right, so we're going to zoom in here a little bit, and I'm going to decrease my brush size, and we're just going to get rid of this last bit. And I'm smudging a little bit here, some of the pixels. That's what happens when you paint too much of like a dark pixel when you're trying to paint light pixels. And I see we've got Anno from the Netherlands, I believe is what you're saying. Land of the, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to say it in case it's a bad word or something. But thanks for representing from the Netherlands. And let me just get rid of this line right here real quick. It's probably a food, I would assume. Looks like waffle. All right. Anyway. We are zoomed out here, so here's our image without the power line. So there is a before, and there is an after. Last thing I'm going to do here for this image is I'm going to create a new layer, and it's already named Vignette here from when I was working on this earlier. And thanks for joining us from France. So fill with, I'll choose transparency and I'll click OK. So there's our vignette layer. And now, of course, I'm going to go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette. And that is going to add a vignette here. And I'm just going to increase the radius a little bit because excuse me, I don't want to have too much of that black overlapping into our image. So just increase that slightly. Just the softness here a little bit. There is a before, there's an after. So I'll click OK. And there is our final image. So here is, I'll shift click on this eye to hide those two layers. There's a before, shift click. There is the final. So now I can export this. And I'm getting another hello from the Netherlands. So thanks, we got a couple people joining us. Thank you for joining us from across the world. Now I'm going to go to File, Export As, and I can export this as a JPEG here, which is what this is set to by default. Somebody asked how to create a GIF in GIMP. All you got to do is come down here under Select File Type by Extension and choose GIF. And now this is a GIF image, but I'm going to keep this a JPEG so I can manually type JPEG up here. That'll save it as a JPEG. And let me just type final here so I don't save over the original. I'll hit Enter. Oh, looks like I already saved something as this. So let me do final 2. Hit export. Oh, it wants me to change this to JPEG. Does not match the chosen file. Okay. Oh, because I have GIF selected below. Here, let me just delete that. Let me manually come over here and select JPEG. And I'll click export. And I'll just keep the quality up to 100, hit export again. And there we go. GIMP does occasionally crash. I'm seeing we've got a question about GIMP crashing. Yeah, it does happen occasionally. Luckily, they installed a feature where it tries to recover your document you're using upon a crash. I have noticed there has been less crashes, and there's still stallouts, which, you know, when you're trying to do something, GIMP will just say not responding, and then it'll just kind of stall out there. But they have worked on the crashes, and I'm sure that when GIMP 3.0 comes out, it's going to get even better. So, and yeah, Paige made the point that that happens more often with large images, which is definitely true. All right, guys, so that's it for this live tutorial, this live photo editing session. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us from all over the world. If you liked it, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can enroll in our GIMP best-selling photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy, which some of you have already done, so thank you for all of you who are students with that course. And I'm getting some thank yous in the chat, so thank you guys for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed the live sessions. You can also support us on Patreon by becoming a patron and get some awesome GIMP extras in return. So check those links out. They're all in the description. Thanks for joining us from Oregon, Josh. So thanks for watching, guys, and happy holidays, and I'll see you next time.